On behalf of the University of California, thank you for tuning in today for the June edition of the UC Alumni Career Network focused on career design. My name is Katie Ward, and I serve as the Director of Outreach and Engagement for the UC Office of the President. I'm honored to be opening up today's event. This program is part of a UC-wide effort to unite and support alumni across our 10 campuses. We aim to equip you with the information, insights, and connections necessary to launch, grow, or expand your career. Throughout today's session, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our speaker by clicking the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or by emailing alumni@ucop.edu. We will try and answer as many questions as possible during the event. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Robin Reshwan, who's the founder and president of CS Advising and Collegial Services and a proud alumna of UC Davis. Robin and her team enable thousands of professionals to advance their careers through advice, career coaching, and recruiting efforts. As a careers writer for usnews.com, her professional development tips are used by additional media outlets, including Yahoo, Business Insider, Fast Company, and Monster. Robin is an experienced entrepreneur, business executive, certified professional resume writer, and a member of the alumni board of UC Davis. We are so thrilled that Robin is joining us today. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Robin.
Hi, everybody. So great to have you all joining us today. We are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is career design, and I'm so glad that you all are joining us today. Our goals for this conversation will be to talk a little bit about why is there career design, some about its principles, and then to jump into some key questions that you all can take away from this to help you explore a little bit more deeply what the right career opportunities and future pathways could be for you. So to jump into it, what's really the purpose of the conversation today? So as you can imagine, career design is a process. So it won't be as simple as in 45 minutes I'll be able to cover all of it, but rather I'd like to introduce the concept to you. And where did this concept come from and why is it so important? So I thought I'd start first by sharing, after 30 years of working with professionals in different phases of their careers, there's definitely been some trends I've seen in terms of how people find their way into an opportunity. The first, and some of you hopefully are in this boat, or you may know people who have been, some people fall in love with a certain topic, subject area, career early in their life. And they may be lucky enough to pursue that their whole career, or it may actually just be what gets them started and they take off from there. Most people that I've met, it's more of a proximity game. So they find about their pathways to work might be mom or dad had a certain profession, maybe their town or the people around them worked for a certain company or did something in particular. Maybe certain employers came to campus or their school was known for a certain area or industry. But for most people, their career starts and usually stays rooted in proximity, what's near them or what's near the people that they know. Now, as things get moving, I noticed two trends from there. Some people will still stay in the boat that they love, but others start to move away from things they don't like. And so the B there is representing, I see a lot of people that their path to work is more about repelling against something that didn't work out, as opposed to intentionally going toward something that they want. And for many people, after they've been doing certain professions or roles for a period of time, there becomes an element of I'm stuck. And so either you get to a certain economic level where you say, I can't stop and start all over again, or you get into your mind, hey, this is what I've gotten into doing, and that I have strengths in this one particular area, there's no way I could start all over again. But for many professionals, they find themselves in this place feeling like, you know what, I don't have control over where this goes. I'm just kind of stuck in this place. Now, the good news is with the rise of technology, with the increase of more and more opportunities being able to be done remotely or having some pieces of it done remotely, there are more options in more physical locations than ever before. So, and then you add to it the amount of education and online access people can get to a range of academic and technical skill sets, it sets us up for some disruption. And the whole idea behind disruption when it comes to your career is pausing and thinking a bit about how did I get to where I am? Who am I? And what are opportunities that could continue to feel satisfying and meet my overall goals? And that really brings us into this era of intentionality. And so it's a new approach. So instead of either finding yourself in a certain role because of proximity or moving away from things you didn't like in your last role, career design is really about the idea of intentionally identifying strengths, opportunities, and pathways that may better suit your needs and the long-term pathway of your career. Now, a couple of key considerations as we walk into this conversation, which is one, you've heard me say it several times, this is a journey. So it's not meant to be just, oh, I thought I was going to be a doctor and now I'm going to be a physicist. But rather, the world of work has many different shades to it. So my hope in this conversation is that you'll find some deeper and more interesting ways to look at career satisfaction and opportunities, and that will give you more pathways rather than fewer. So remember, it's a forward-moving type of progression, but in terms of what those destinations are, the whole idea is to have several different ways that you think you can use your skills. And then the second side that this picture is showing us is that this is a marathon. Like any good marathon, there's going to be some time in which you have to slow down, conserve energy to go faster or finish the marathon later. And there'll be times that you have to speed up if you're trying to maintain a certain time or you're trying to catch up with your running partners. Careers are the same thing. So many of us, especially if you've been working for more than 10 years, you fully recognize sometimes we have market uncertainty, sometimes we have shifts in industry and professions. Obviously, we're clearly in one of them right now. So when we have these undulations, or changes in the market, those can be good times sometimes to do that pullback and assessment that can help you to move forward as the market starts to change. So in that vein, the goal for today is that it's going to get you thinking. Now, hopefully, when you think, you don't wind up looking like this man. But really, again, the purpose is to get you to think a little bit differently and to move away from just doing something because it's the way it's been done and go towards something that is more out of intent. All right, so now where we're going to spend our time is I've identified 5 key questions that I think are so important for career design. So I'm going to give a little overview of a typical career design process, and then we'll go into those key questions. When we get to the end of the questions, we will have some time for Q&A. So as we're going through the content, please don't hesitate to submit your questions through the Q&A feature. Additionally, when we get to the end, I will have a screen up there that gives you access to email us for a resource sheet that will cover many of the topics that we talked about and many of the sources and tools that I'll bring up. So again, along the way, feel free, put your questions up. We'll do our best to address them most likely at the end. And in terms of links to the documents and things that I'm using to support the conversation, we'll have the ability at the end for you to reach out to get those resources. So now, let's talk about career design. There are a lot of different ways to pursue designing your career. Some are done on self-study, some are done with a career coach or career strategist like I am or the people on my team. Some are done in workshops. But in general, all of them will include 4 aspects. And we're going to delve into what these 4 aspects are. The first part that you'll see will be doing some self-assessment. So when you start thinking about career design, and like I said, this is the piece that's often overlooked by many people, is stopping and saying, wait a minute, what's the me part of this equation? So before you pursue any changes, start by assessing yourself. Now, fascinatingly or interestingly enough, there's tremendous research that says when you have a better handle on yourself and your natural talents, you actually will do better at work if you're able to use those things. You'll be more productive, you'll be more engaged, you're more likely to stay in that role. So it's a win across the board when people have some nice introspection and have some understanding of their natural strengths that come out professionally. So what could some of these strengths be? So what I tell people is, and there's a variety of ways of getting to what your strengths are. There's certainly online tests and things like that you can take. But you can actually start by just asking your family stories. So if you were to ask my family, I have 3 sisters, and they would say certainly as a little person, I was quite bossy, but I was certainly very comfortable with if things were chaotic or going on, I could naturally put order to them. It didn't fluster me. I was comfortable stepping into that leadership role and saying, hey, can you do this, that, or the other? So that ability to take a variety of things going on and to put them together and to communicate where to go was something I naturally enjoyed doing. And what I found in my career, regardless of the title, the function, or the industry, roles that let me flex those muscles or those superpowers, I tended to like better. Why? Because 1, I've been working on them all my life, so I, tended to do them fairly well. And 2, they were the things that made me sit up straighter and feel like I was contributing. So that's one of the things you want to start to think about is what are some of my natural strengths that can come into the workplace? This is an example of a few things that someone might think about themselves. Now, once you've done some thinking about your natural strengths and what you can bring into the workplace, the next step is to start to think about, okay, so that's great that I, personally can apply order to things, or when I'm at work, I'm a little more organized, or I have some, a range of strengths there. But now I got to go look at roles and see, where do my strengths fit in? So one of the most important things when you think about bringing your value into work is a marketplace transaction. So I love to remind people that there's this both interested in the work and qualified aspect that has to help or has to play a role if you're going to pursue any career. So I put the quote there from my mother-in-law, and my husband loves to tell the story of when he was a new college grad and he was working in San Francisco. And he's in the financial services industry, so he was having to go into work at 5 in the morning. And he was complaining to his mother, and his mother said, rightfully so, look, if it was meant to be fun and easy, they wouldn't need to pay you. So it's important, after you identify your interests and your strengths, to remember you're asking to be paid for them. So this is a marketplace transaction. So I have the picture of the lady at the farmer's market buying carrots. So when you go to the farmer's market, let's say you're going to make a salad and you're thinking, okay, I think I want to get some carrots to put in my salad. And you go to the farmer's market. You're starting first by looking for the freshest and most appetizing carrots. You're not starting the journey by going, I wonder which grower is most interested in growing carrots. Or I wonder which grower is most excited about being at the farmer's market today, right? It's coming first with, there's something I've come to buy. Employers are the same way. The fact that you're interested in the profession, while it can be interesting, their first move is to say, I'm looking for someone who's qualified and can add value. And so also bear that in mind when we talk about career design. It's not a one-sided equation. You're looking to make money for this. So you want to think about not just the skills and the attributes that you have, but those that are of interest to the market. Now, the third part of the process is what we call the reality or the market test. So where the rubber meets the road. And so whenever you're thinking about when you're going through this process of, okay, I have these skills and attributes that I'm both qualified and interested in using. I've started to identify roles, industries, or functions where these can be applied. And now I got to see if this actually is occurring in the market around me. So is there proof that these skills actually have a place in the market? What are the best ways that I can represent my value? So let me show you a little bit more about this. This cartoon is a perfect exemplification of what can happen sometimes, which is you can think to yourself, I found my gift. I am great at selling things. And in particular, I know a tremendous amount about ice. I can sell ice to anybody. But if you're sitting there, in this case, right, if you're sitting there somewhere very cold, is that the right market? So that rubber meets the road test would probably fail. So you want to think about the same thing. So for each of us, you might physically be sitting in a certain location in which the pathways or the industries that interest you most, if they're not physically in that market and you're not thinking about moving, that may not be the right pathway for you, right? That's just some of the reality for many of us. A second thing is you also have to think about, if the new area that I'm qualified and interested in pursuing, do they hire people with my background, at my age, with my experience? So I'll give you an example. One of my coaching clients had been retired from the insurance industry. They went and took a program on electronic medical records. They were a fabulous student, and they were super excited because they were told through the program that there's going to be lots of career options in electronic medical records. But when we went and actually looked at, okay, so what kind of jobs come out of that? Well, they're mostly traveling consulting roles. And this particular person was in their 70s. So the likelihood, either that one, he wanted to do traveling consulting roles, or two, that companies were going to hire someone in their 70s for traveling consulting roles, was very low. So as you're thinking about these processes, that market test component is so key, because you don't want to go too far down a pathway that, quite frankly, just isn't going to work out for you. Now, the last piece of most career design processes would be that taking action. And I think this quote here is very helpful. So intellectually saying I want to pursue something new is great, but truly you haven't begun or done anything to make that happen until you've actually put action behind it. And so make sure that no matter what process you undertake, again, whether you do it on your own, whether you're doing it in a small group or with a coach, you want to make sure you're pairing it with goals, ways to measure your success, and actual action. So that's the rub. People can have great ideas, but the putting them in motion is the part that's uncomfortable. And it's also the part that is risky and can feel a little dangerous. So make sure that no matter how you come into this process, hold yourself accountable to doing something about it, because that's really the only way to see where it'll go. And research shows us that individuals that actually put a goal to it with action steps and hold themselves accountable will thrive and have much better outcomes than those that just think about it and dabble. Now, this has probably left you going, okay, wait, Robin, you just scratched the surface of these 4 topics. What am I supposed to do with this? And so now we're going to go into a couple of key questions at a deeper level for you to understand. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Let me just make sure from a Q&A standpoint, if there's anything that we have to address immediately. Okay, good. So we're going to get into some of the questions that have been posed so far as we go a little deeper into these key questions that we can ask ourselves. All right. So remember, this is an approach. So we just mapped out what a typical career design process would look like in its entirety, from concept to execution. But now we're going to go a little deeper into some of those areas that you can actually take on and think about on your own. So question number 1, as you're at the precipice of saying I want to do something different, is to say, what do I need from my work? I always start here first with our clients. And the reason why is work is not a cure-all for everything in your life. And I'm not implying that all of you think that. But I do think there has been so much advertising and promotion of, oh, if you find the right career, you'll never work a day in your life. I don't know that that's true. Remember, again, you're being paid. If you're being paid, there are going to be some pieces of your work that probably are not the stuff of your dreams. Might be boring, might be redundant, might be, not so stimulating, but you can still find a great career that has many of the attributes that you need, as well as, some things that you have to do and you're willing to do because they get you this career. So question number 1 is, what do I need from my work? Well, what does that mean? The answers are many, but for many people, they start with their priorities, right? So why do I leave the house and go to work? It could be for money, and that's obviously a very clear and obvious one for many of us. For those of us that are maybe coming back into the workforce after being home with your family, or maybe they've been in one phase of their career and they're going to move to another one. Work might be a place to find camaraderie that's different than your children. It might be a place to find better balance. So maybe you had one of those upward careers that constantly required more of you, more separation from your family, more time at the office, more travel. And now you're finally at the place where you're like, hey, I can do something that is maybe more emotionally stimulating, maybe leverages more of my values, maybe lets me have more time to spend with my kids or my spouse. So whatever they may be, start first with a list of your priorities. So why are you going to work? In addition to making this list, put them in some order for yourself, because it's important to understand, if I have a job that pays more, but the balance isn't as great, well, how can I make that decision? Right? So look at your priorities first, because those aren't dependent on a title or a function. Those are the reason why you separate from your personal life to go to work. The second thing that you want to factor in terms of what you need from your work are values. Interesting enough, there's been some fantastic research, it was a couple years ago, that they found the majority of times that an employee does not succeed in a workplace is not because of skills or qualifications. It's more about a misalignment in values. So I'll give you a personal story. After college, I went to Davis, and I left Davis full of, I wanted to go help the world. I wanted to do great things. And so the first job I took was in a social service agency. It was a United Way agency, and I was in the training and development department. From my standpoint, it aligned beautifully because I liked talking, presenting, helping, so training and development, and I was very interested in helping others. So social services and services to those that came from varied backgrounds was very appealing to me. Now, one of the things I learned when I got into that opportunity was the pace of the environment just killed me. I would come in and, something that might take 8 hours, I might knock out in 4 hours and be like, okay, what else can I do? So in my case, I had an efficiency value that was very important to me. I hadn't realized it at the time, but ultimately I wound up leaving social service. I moved into recruiting because I found recruiting, I could be efficient, I could be fast, and I could still help people. I helped them find jobs. So think about the connection, not only with your priorities, but what values are very important to you in your work, and have a good handle of those, because you want to make sure that the pathways you're pursuing align with your priorities and align with your values. So now we're going to move into our second question. Oh, and there's our values. I apologize, the screen hadn't moved there. Question number 2, what are your interests and drivers at work? So for us, again, in our coaching practice, we start first with priorities, right? Why are you going to work? And the second thing we talk about is drivers. And drivers, to me, are so profoundly beneficial. So let's talk about what's a driver? What does that mean? This analogy here, right? You look at someone who, as a kid, they love fishing, and they go, "Ooh, when I grow up, I want to pursue my passion for fishing as my career." Now, many of us realize, okay, it's not that simple, because what does a career in fishing look like? Does that mean I'm being commercial fisherman? Does it mean I'm working on the ships? Does it mean I'm working in, seafood packaging? Perhaps I don't like the environment. But what I want you to do when we think about drivers is you want to go deeper and say, well, what do I like about fishing? Is it perhaps that there's some peacefulness there? Is it that there's some problem solving there? What are some of the different underpinnings of my passion for fishing that make me love it? So categories of drivers are things like your internal and external motivators. So maybe I like the reward of when I catch a fish. That feels really gratifying. And by the way, I realize this is a very simple type of example. There might be the internal motivators of, perhaps I feel this tremendous feeling of satisfaction when I can plan the right bait and I put it out and I get the fish that I want, and you know, I was able to, and now I have a meal for tonight. So think about your internal and external motivators. Professional and career development can also be a huge driver. So perhaps the actual job I get today isn't as important as where that job will take me. For people that have started in a career where they've worked their way up, they understand that delayed gratification also return to them probably professional and career and networking development that they may not have had if they moved too quickly. Many of us find satisfaction because of the skills that we use. So again, using my leadership example. So perhaps the right work for me is one where I get to flex my leadership muscles. And so while I may have the same title in a different company, perhaps if I don't have any direct reports or I don't get to lead, the compensation might be great, the company might be great, but at the end of the day, the driver is missing for me. Benefits that you receive can also be a very powerful driver. So, and not just compensation. Some people it's health benefits. Some people it's, there's some companies that have, you know, President's Club and Achievement Clubs and a variety of different ways that you get perks and benefits. Maybe they have educational reimbursement or flex time, work from home, whatever it might be. Another category of drivers is the environment. So it could be an environment where there's a lot of camaraderie or new technology or innovation and learning. So these categories of drivers are really important because I've seen more frequently, it's the alignment with those drivers that make someone feel like their career is meaningful and they can feel like they're moving forward. And that often has more bearing on those feelings of satisfaction than the title in the industry. The other brilliant piece of this, it means you could be sitting there and saying, hey, I'm in the insurance industry. How in the world can I consider what else I might want to go after? Instead of focusing on the subject matter expertise, insurance, drill down a little bit deeper and say, what are some of my drivers? What are some of my success points and things that I have loved about the industry that have kept me in it? And now let me go see if there's other industries, companies, and roles that have those same drivers there. So it's one of the greater tools for helping you look at where can I go next. Now, in addition to the drivers, there's some great tools that you can use to help understand them. One, there's a company in Structure that actually makes these very cool cards that you can use as a driver's exercise to help you better understand what your drivers are and to have a vocabulary framework around them. You can also work with a coach. This is Mary, who's one of our coaches, who also is a UC graduate. But you know, we work one-on-one with clients all the time to help them identify it. And there's, you know, some great tools that you can find online that let you personally go and work through those in like a workshop style. All right, so moving to our next question. What can I contribute at work? All right, so we've covered how can I think a little bit about my motivation for work, right? What am I looking to get from work? What are my drivers that need to be present for a role to feel right and good and satisfying? And then thinking now, so we're connecting to the market. What can I contribute at work? And again, these are different than what I contribute at home or personally. These are things that, what are the things that someone would pay me to do? So here's an example of different skills that you can contribute at work. There's soft skills, and soft skills are loosely defined as those less quantifiable pieces, but the research keeps coming back and telling us soft skills have much more bearing on long-term career progression and success. There are hard skills, so these are technical areas, and technical doesn't have to mean accounting or finance or engineering, but they're the more quantifiable tools. They're often gained through education, through experience, through training. And in some cases, you'll have a role in which there's certain non-negotiable hard skills you must have, but the actual selection is based on the soft skills. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm pursuing an analyst role, but it's an analyst role where I'm servicing bilingual clients. Well, I think we could all understand you can't pursue that role unless you can speak whatever that second language is, right? Because it doesn't matter how fabulous of an analyst you are. If you can't actually, for example, if it's in Spanish, if you can't speak Spanish, we all understand that there's no way that company will hire you. Now, if you can speak Spanish and you're an analyst, really that interview selection and satisfaction is going to come much more from those soft skills, such as potentially your critical thinking skills, your teamwork, your organizational. They may have more bearing on it. So again, when you think about career design or career transition, you want to hold in the balance both the technical hard skills that you have to be qualified or hired for a role, but then what are also the soft skills that you can bring to the table that could make you a more interesting, a more dynamic hire. Now, one of the questions I often get is, well, okay, so how do I figure that out, especially if I haven't been in the market recently? Well, one thing you can do is go look at job posts that appeal to you. Now, this is a screenshot on LinkedIn. And so I just put, if you can see up there, I'm looking for marketing manager roles. And within each role, I can see what the company has chosen to post about responsibilities, qualifications, job overview. So that's one way, is if there's a certain industry or profession that you have your eye on, you can come into LinkedIn or another job board and put the titles of the roles that you're interested in and take a look at responsibilities and qualifications and start to do what we call a T comparison, right? So we're saying, what is the job requiring? What am I bringing to the table? And if this starts to look like 70% or greater, these might be good potential paths for you to consider. Now, another way that you can also take a look at that, or rather, we're going to go next step, is what roles can use your contributions. So, right, so we're starting to get a handle on what are these qualifications that are necessary. Now, how do we pair them with roles? So one test that you can take online is something called the Career Explorer test. And again, I'll have a link to that in our resource sheet. It's a great one for some of you that are scratching your head going, I just don't know where to go. So I don't necessarily have a particular pathway in mind or an industry or function. So you can come into the Career Explorer test. It'll ask you a series of questions. And from that, it will give you some ideas as to careers that might align or match with both qualifications, and it has some driver and value related questions as well. In addition to that, you can do some keyword searching. So we talked about before, you can use searching by a certain profession to say what skills are required, but now we can reverse this and we can say, well, what if I put in certain skills that I have, and now I'll let the job board tell me what jobs reference those skills. So in this particular case, we're showing, we put in writing and legal as some of the skills. And this is a real life client of mine who's been retired for several years due to some health issues. She's looking at coming back into the market. Her background, she went to law school, ultimately didn't become an attorney, but had that legal mind. And then she loves writing. That's one of her strengths. She does a lot of writing and research. And she happened to be in a smaller market. So Fresno is where she was. So we just said, hey, let's put in writing and legal and see what kind of roles come up. Well, freelance court reporters was one of them in Fresno. But for any of you, again, that are scratching your heads going, I don't know where to start, this can be a great way to start to look at particular pairings of skills that you have and see, are there open positions that use these particular skills to give you ideas. Another thing you can do is follow alumni pathways. And I love doing this, especially with communities as well educated and robust and represented in California as our UC alumni are. So what you're seeing here is a LinkedIn screenshot. So what I did is I took a degree, so in my case, international relations. I took a keyword, so I put recruiting. I put a start and end year, because let's say I'm sitting here and I'm in that 50th range, and maybe I'm thinking of a career reboot. And again, I'm not entirely sure the pathway I want to go. So I could say, well, let me look at what other UC Davis grads who graduated around the same time as me, who may have had the same degree as me and had recruiting, well, let me see what they're doing now. Now, clearly, I'm not going to go through 15,000 entries, but what it lets me do, and you can see down below, is I could say, well, let me look, I narrowed it to San Francisco Bay Area. And then I'm starting to see companies, right? So the majority work at Kaiser, then Genentech, Apple, Google, Wells Fargo, Cisco, UCSF, right? I could continue to expand that and look down. I could also put some additional skills. So I could do recruiting and analysis, or recruiting and technology, or recruiting and certain industry, like telecommunications. Probably not, but I could. So when you do things like this, you start to see pathways. So ways that others who had similar skills or qualifications, what they pursued. And that can be a great way to start to brainstorm about what the next thing could be. But what it also shows you is there's been a pathway carved already. So if you were going to reach out to someone who had a similar degree and background for an informational conversation, you already have, if you've warmed the conversation up a little bit, and the market's already shown you, hey, when these things come together, this is a potential outcome. So this can be a really great way to get some ideas about where to go next. You can also take this from the standpoint of, let's say there is a company that you're very interested in. So let's say you're on this webinar and you're thinking, I want to go work for CS Advising. You can pull the company up on LinkedIn and take a look at, well, who are their employees? What were their backgrounds? What are they doing? Do they seem similar or dissimilar to me in terms of what happened before they got to this point? So that can be another great exercise when we're starting to think about the types of roles that you can pursue, is go look at organizations that you're interested in and look at their staff and their team to get a sense of where they came from, what are they doing, to start to see if you see some alignment with your particular background. And in general, when we're thinking about roles, you can research companies, roles, skills, industries that appeal to you. Start by asking people in your network, hey, I'm really interested in, let's just use online productivity tools. So let me start in my network and maybe start with people close to me first and say, if you were going to go into this space, any suggestions? Well, they might say, yeah, look at a Dropbox, look at a Microsoft, look at a Zoom. These are some of the bigger names in productivity tools. They may have personal referrals, such as my friend works for Dialpad or Blue Jeans, which are also online communications tools that aren't as well known as Zoom, but might be interesting people for you to talk to and learn more about their industry. You can look at company websites. So as you start to hear about different companies, look them up on their website to get a sense of their staff, their team, their roles. You can obviously use LinkedIn, as we just discussed, looking at people, companies, alumni. You can do keyword searches. So just like we looked at before, we can look at combinations of skill sets and backgrounds in industries to see what things come up in searches. And then you can also look at industry associations and content from them. So again, let's say I built my career in the communications field. And so maybe I can go look at an industry association to see what they're talking about as kind of the next generation, what's going to happen next, and start to see if there's some parallels and places where I can pursue. All right, so our last question among our question of 5 is, what steps can I take to pursue targets? So again, from our journey, we started first with, what are my priorities? Why am I going to work, right? That's kind of a big question that we want to hit first. Then we move to our drivers. So when I'm thinking about success and satisfaction, what kind of things need to take place at work for it to feel right and feel energizing? Then we said, okay, so now let's parlay that and say, what are the actual skills and skills and expertise that I can contribute? Then we look at the roles where those skills seem to be represented. So we can start to have a short list of roles and opportunities. And then finally, how can we actually take action and pursue some of these opportunities? First thing you're going to start with, and I love this picture for so many reasons, is proximity. So again, I talked about how proximity is what gets most of us into our careers. It's how most of us keep going. It is also the most important tool you have when we talk about pivots, design, or architecting where you want to go. What I love about this picture is, you have people that are volunteering, and I certainly think things that you do outside of work can be so impactful in terms of where you go with your work, because you forge networks based on altruism and other things. If you notice, right, we've got the kids there. So sometimes some of the relationships we have that come from the personal aspects of our life, and for many of us, if we've been home with kids, the relationships that you met through your children's school and those areas can be very important. We have the woman who's in her dress. So she, to me, resembles someone who is a previous colleague. So again, reaching out to people you've worked with in the past, or people you may know in professional capacity, or your general community, can all be very beneficial in starting to get suggestions of things you can pursue and learn about. Now, another tool you can use is what I call use one to find more. So meaning that, let's say you saw that Zoom, right? So hey, Zoom is a company, it's on the move, it's growing, it's hiring. And so you're aware of the fact that Zoom may have opportunities for people like you, but it is a well-known company and probably more competitive to get into. So when you see one organization or one pathway that might be interesting, use that to go find others that might be similar. So this adds to our options of what we can pursue. So looking at competitors of companies, history and future trends in the industry can help you also identify more ways that you can pursue a potential path. In this particular quote, one of the things I hear so frequently is I will have people reach out to us and say, okay, so I'm really interested, I want to shift, and one of the more frequent shifts we hear is I want to shift to tech. And of course, when I say, okay, great, what kind of companies? It's always the big names. It's Facebook, it's Amazon, it's Google. I strongly encourage you, when you're making a pivot or a change, pursue the companies that aren't as well known, unless you have a really strong background. So oftentimes when we think about that qualification value set, if it's a new industry or pathway, you may not have the same track record to be as competitive as a candidate as someone else. So make sure that you're not just looking at the roads most traveled in terms of the high desire for the most known companies, but start to think about what we call adjacency. So thinking about, if I was interested, for example, in Siemens, which is a big company, start to think about, all right, if I'm not ready to jump into Siemens, or maybe my background isn't as competitive, let me think about what surrounds that particular company. So let me think about other companies that might be within that industry. Let me think about new businesses that may have started or stemmed from that industry. Let me think about different geographies, value steps. So again, it's not that this particular map, you're going to pursue each of those pieces, but it gets you starting to think about, if you're targeting one field or one industry, look and see what it connects to, so that now you have more options that might actually be more open to your background when you're making a pivot. And then finally, when we think about taking action, don't overlook the small business, volunteering, and consulting type of relationship. There's a couple stats about how many small businesses there are in the United States. And obviously, given the downturn, we've heard a lot about how small businesses and micro businesses have been impacted. But what I'll remind you, and as someone who's a small business owner, partnering with a small business or a business owner can be a great way to start to flex and strengthen skills that you might want to use in a pivot or career design capacity and you need to try out. So being able to approach, for example, I have a client of mine who comes from technology, and she was in technology advising. She took off time for the kids. And then now that she's coming back into the market, she's got a lot of really great connections. So in her particular case, she's working with a person she knows who owns the company and is helping do some social media management for them. She's offering her services for free so that she can practice and work with some of the more current tools. and build a track record. And at the same time, the business is obviously open to the support because they've had to shrink down their staff and make some changes. So having someone that can help them in that area is very valuable. Freelancing or project-based work is another area. And gosh, it's grown tremendously over the last couple of years. So as of Q4 2019, 35% of workers were freelancers. In downturns, historically, the hiring that comes back in are freelancers and project-based professionals because companies are unsure of what the long-term hiring looks like, but they know they've got immediate needs. And so a project person or a freelancer may be able to help them get that work done, could lead to something else, but selfishly for each of us, if we take on that kind of work, it gives us a chance to strengthen our skills, build a track record, build people that can advocate and be a reference for us. Volunteer project work or partnering with someone who might be an entrepreneur or a small business are great ways in any market to start to demonstrate and develop some of these skills, but certainly in a downturn, they can be excellent complements to help you make a pivot or to help you try out or get traction in an area that you want to pursue. All right, so that brings us to Q&A. So a couple of final words before I'm going to go back to Katie and ask about questions is, I think this particular quote is very fitting, which is, again, thinking of it in our head, while it can be interesting, does not make anything happen. So remember, a lot of this is about just getting things in motion. And don't worry if when you set off to start to pursue and interact, you may not have the perfect idea of exactly what you want to do yet. The key is to ask questions, to engage, to learn more, to be open. What we frequently find when we work with clients is sometimes they start this journey and realize the job or the profession they're in is actually the right one. But they have a renewed commitment to it because they're like, hey, I had a chance to look around and actually what I'm doing doesn't feel like a prison anymore. It actually feels like a great choice. But it becomes now a choice, right? They've re-chosen it as opposed to feeling like, I'm stuck. Many people find that as they start to pursue things, they unlock different pathways that they hadn't thought about before. And so be open to the fact that the right opportunity you may not know yet. Because if we're working from that place of proximity, the more people we talk to, the more people we explore with, the more new ideas come to us, and that's where the right thing might be. All right, so based on that, we're going to stop here. Again, we're going to open it up to questions. For follow-up items, I encourage you, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're interested in getting the resource sheet, there is how you can email us directly for those. And we also do resume reviews for our attendees of workshops, so you can send us a message about that. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. Really wonderful to hear all of your insights on career design. We have a lot of questions in the box, so we'll move through. The first one is on, do you have any recommended strengths or career aptitude tests? I know you mentioned the Career Explorer. Any others that you would encourage our attendees to check out?
Yeah, you know what, there's quite a few. Clifton StrengthsFinder seems to be a big one, and I do think that might be administered by Gallup. There's one also, speaking of Tony Robbins, there's actually, I think if you go onto Tony Robbins' site, I think he has a free maybe Myers-Briggs. Those are some of the big names, but I think it depends as to one, maybe starting with a free resource first to see what helps you. And so anyway, Myers-Briggs, Clifton StrengthsFinders, those can all be, and then, what we mentioned on the drivers and the Career Explorer test can all be great places to start.
Wonderful. Our next question is from Carolyn, who would like to know what resources are available to help match my skills and what I enjoy with potential careers that exist. I'm 52 and looking to enter a new industry.
So I don't know that let me go backwards. One, check with your alumni association. So I know, I'm very fortunate. I get a chance to work with Ben, who's involved in the alumni association at UC Davis. I know they, and I believe all of our campuses, have been trying to offer a lot of different workshops and tools to help people understand their career and pursue their career. So I'd say start there first, take advantage of some of those things that may already be available. I will have some resources on the tip sheet too. So, an online guidebook that a woman I know authored that helps someone go through that process. And even just, as I mentioned, looking at some of those questions and starting to write down answers for yourself to start to play around and get a sense of what the market has for your background.
Wonderful. Our next question is from Heather, who would like to learn more about how to monetize a skill set. For instance, would you be willing to share more about how you set up your company and practice?
I'm not sure that I entirely understand the question. So this may be one that might work best if you email directly. But I think when we talk about monetizing, certainly looking at job posts at Glassdoor, even at some Bureau of Labor statistics, you can look up certain professions and be able to see what the current salary ranges are and historical data. Now, uncertain times, obviously throw all that to the side. It doesn't mean that we completely wash out because 80% of the market is still employed, but in certain areas, I think when you've had significant downturn, we're going to see when those jobs come back in the market, they're going to be priced differently because those businesses are going to have different profit points and things that are going to make labor is just going to have a different value there. So yeah, I would take a look at that. I think if you're asking about the coaching side, I think that's a whole different paradigm when people do coaching, because not only do they have to factor in the time when they're working with a client, but then they also have to factor in all the things it takes in service of clients or to find clients. And so ultimately it's a lot like real estate. You have to come up with a price point that not only covers the work when you're working with someone, but all the work that leads into it. And I think companies think about that as well. They think about primary value, and they think about everything it takes to get to primary value and to service the clients they have.
Great. Our next question is from Mark, and he's wondering if you're aware of any culturally unique approaches to pursuing life's purpose. For instance, the Japanese concept of ikigai, the intersection of what you're passionate about, what you love, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for. So any culturally unique approaches you're aware of?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't really have any advice in that particular side. I'm sure there's some great tools and resources out there. And there's even some things that start to get into more overarching, what we'd say more life coaching and purpose coaching. Our niche, we stay more on that career side as opposed to getting into some of the larger picture in terms of how work serves, your larger purpose and your whole being.
Our next question is from Chris, who would like to know if you could share the differences between drivers and priorities.
Yes, absolutely. So to me, a priority is, why am I leaving the house to go to work? So in other words, what does work, sort of that criteria of my must-haves, such as I need to make a certain amount of money, or I need to have jobs that are X amount close to me, or maybe I have expertise in a certain industry. So it's some of the external things that you need to take from work. To me, drivers are a little bit more intrinsic. So there are things that are unique to me that I'm hoping to have served when I'm at work. So, and in an ideal work environment, we have our priorities being met and our drivers being met. My guess will be sometimes in pursuit of your priorities, some of your drivers are not being serviced. So for example, if I have an exceptionally high mortgage and my purpose or I need to go to work to make a certain amount of money, I may not be also able to find a job where I have good work-life balance or that's low on the stress side. Now, I may only be able to do that job for a certain period of time before it starts to drive me mad or my work suffers. But part of my journey might be to say, hey, over time, can I get myself in a place where maybe I don't have that same money priority so I could get a little bit higher on my drivers?
Great. Our next question is from Martha. Thinking about the career design principles, is there anything that you would apply differently if thinking about a creative career where it's especially difficult to attain?
Yeah, creative careers are very interesting. And I actually ran, one of the lines of business I ran for a long time was on the creative and marketing side. And I remember being so struck by the community was so different. The one I had run prior to that was accounting and finance, especially like at an executive consulting level. So I do think this is one where you definitely, a lot is about networks, really being able to connect with thought leaders and professionals that you feel like have that right blend between their creativity and their artistic self and the commerce side of it. You know, at the end of the day, it's still back to that carrot analogy in which the artistic and creative pieces of your work are being purchased essentially by someone paying you a salary. So I do think having a healthy sense of what is the market looking for and the market buying is important. But I think, you know, really, again, looking toward thought leaders, people that you admire, both their creative sensibilities and their ability to earn a living doing it, and reaching out to learn more about it. I've also found as well that many in the creative communities can sometimes be more apt to want to share. And we've seen this a lot, even like in the design sprint side, which is more of a technology process of, you know, making technology related ideas, but doing it in kind of a faster, more truncated way. There's a lot of creativity around how can you make those decisions in a commercially viable way. So yeah, I would look for thought leaders and people that you admire in that space and see if you can get some advice and insight from them, and be on the lookout for webinars and other tools that a lot of them are doing right now to help to share what they have going on with the community during this uncertainty.
Wonderful. Our next question is from Patricia. Knowing that our class of 2020 is still soon going to enter the workplace, any special insights or special career advice for the class of 2020?
Yes, and this is, gosh, of such particular interest right now. So the first thing is ask. I cannot express this enough. Do not, so I'll use my company's example. You know, we are a company of 10 to 12 people prior to COVID-19. I would tell you probably half of the people I have hired approached me or were a referral to me and reached out and said, you know, hey, Robin, I'd love to learn more about XYZ. And we wound up creating a project or an internship. And from that, it turned into something else, right? So here, if I'm what would be defined as a micro business, and we've already seen that the number of small companies and micro companies in the marketplace, I mean, it's the majority of employers are these smaller organizations. So do not miss the opportunity to connect with people and just ask for advice, ask to learn about their market or industry. Start there first, because when you have some clarity around what interests you and vocabulary around your strengths and what you look to bring to work, you'll fare much better in interviews than someone who's more of, oh, yes, that sounds interesting, but I can't give you anything very targeted. So that's the first thing, is by asking questions, learning about different industries, becoming informed, you have a better sense of what you're actually pursuing and how to talk about it. But then the second thing is look for ways where you can volunteer to help. So there are so many different organizations that would take the help if you knew what you were asking about. So meaning that, you know, it's one thing if my neighbor says, hey, Robin, Jimmy's looking for some work this summer, and then all the responsibilities on me to have to figure out, okay, well, what can Jimmy do? How can he add value? Versus if Jimmy contacts me and says, you know, hi, Robin, I noticed that, you know, you have a presence on Pinterest, but you know, maybe you haven't updated as much. Could I maybe do a series of posts for you about college students and career tips? Ooh, okay, Jimmy's now given me something specific that I don't have. So for college students and new grads, I highly encourage you, and your parents can be very helpful, come up with some things that interest you and some potential projects or ways that you could offer benefits to organizations, whether it's paid or unpaid, and then actually reach out and see if you can suggest that. When you do, you will be amazed at how many more opportunities. In addition to that, there is a great, a colleague of mine, Robert Schindel, who runs a company called Intern Bridge. His passion is around internships and students and new to career professionals accessing work. So he's a great person to look into as well. All right, Katie, I realize we're at 1 o'clock.
Robin, this was so wonderful. I know we had many other questions in the pool, so we'll look to connect with you and get some of those answers out. But on behalf of the University of California, thank you for joining us today for the UC Alumni Career Network webinar. It was a pleasure to connect virtually with each of you today. We appreciate you making time to be part of today's event and hope you gain some great tips on crafting a career that works for you. Please join us again on July 7th for our next edition of the UC Alumni Career Network, which is going to be focused on women and work. I hope you'll take a few minutes to provide feedback on today's event following the survey link which appeared when you launched today's webinar. I'd personally like to thank Robin for her time, her generosity, and commitment to the University of California. The career insights and advice she shared today make me especially proud to be part of the UC community. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.